Hey Eden fam, welcome to the very first episode of the Sharegrid series. I really wanted to start a series about Sharegrid itself. In no shape or way is this video sponsored in any sort of way. This is just my own personal experience of using Sharegrid, and next month will be a full calendar year cycle of it. And I started last year, February 2021, and I was very interested in it. Wanted to figure out a little bit more, got some wisdom and some information from other people that use Sharegrid, and I wanted to share that information, that wisdom as well, through this video and through this series, and some different new ideas and some fresh ideas that I want to implement in 2022 as we start this new year. So for transparency's sake, last year was my first year doing Sharegrid, and it was really cool. I got to meet a lot of cool creatives, a lot of entrepreneurs, artists, and stuff like that, just by handing them off my equipment and letting them use my own personal equipment for whatever creativity or creative project that they had for themselves. So either they didn't have the equipment or they needed some extra equipment on set. It kind of like varied. A lot of people used it for weddings. People used it for photo shoots, video projects, music videos, all sorts of stuff. And it was really interesting. Some people like go on vacation with some of the equipment, and it was just really cool. Some people just needed some equipment, and it's such a like interesting way to just make some extra cash. I'm in the mindset of I don't want this to be my full-time thing. This is not what I rely my income on. Was just extra cash that maybe I can use towards different gear or gear that I could improve on, like equipment-wise, like rig setups and stuff like that, and maybe just invest it back into Sharegrid and create new listings, new items that other people could rent out. So last year I started in February, and I didn't know how it was going to go, and I was like, okay, cool. Made about $300. I was like, wow, this is really cool. This is just different and nothing to like be wowed about. But it was just like, okay, cool. Now I got to experience it and stuff like that. So we'll just see how the year goes. The best month was July, and I made $872.95. That was the best month. The worst month of last year was November at $110.50. So it definitely varied. I never broke that 1K mark. And this income wise is just solely based off just Sharegrid, not like any personal kind of like rentals with friends and stuff like that. And that stuff I recorded on my own and put in like a whole spreadsheet about that. But this was more just solely on the platform of Sharegrid. That other way is just I'd recommend it. I kind of don't recommend it just because it's friends, and I already insure my equipment. So if anything were to happen, like I could just let them know, like, hey, like it came back broken or something's wrong with the equipment, and then we can take care of it through insurance and stuff like that. But this equipment is insured through Sharegrid, which is really nice, and then renters can rent out the equipment and use it for whatever they want. So last year, rental profits from February to December, I made $3,791 off rentals alone through Sharegrid, and that was awesome. I appreciated it. I was like, sick, cool. There was a solid year, and for the first time doing it, and nothing to like, definitely not to be like full time and be like, oh, let me rely on my full income on this. This is just something that I can use those profits to not like buy this expensive equipment, because my mindset is let me use the equipment that I already use in my sort of atmosphere and that my sort of workflow, that I don't need to go buy this expensive equipment and be like, okay, this is just going to be on Sharegrid and just going to rent out. I'm going to make so much money off of it. It's not the mindset I want to go off. I just want to get equipment that is fitting to what people are looking to rent and what is in demand at the moment. So that's why a lot of my equipment is kind of geared towards that. It's not becoming outdated. Some of the equipment is becoming a little bit more the older version, and of course people want that newer version, but maybe some people want to try out the older version. Maybe that's more in their what they can afford, and so they want to try it out so that they can buy that equipment. And since that price is going down on the older versions, they will pull the trigger and buy the older version of the cameras, if that makes sense. So yeah, and then my number one rental was a Sony a7 III rig setup. So I have just the a7 III right here, just like this. It's got the cage, but it's usually like swapped with this. Right now I have the USR inside this cage setup, but usually people rent it with the a7 III rig setup, and it just looks just like this. So that was my number one rental, and actually rented like 11 times, and it had 247 listing viewings. So that was like the number one item. Following up with that was the RS2 with 10 rentals and 43 listing viewings. I definitely felt like the RS2 was being rented out more for some reason. Maybe I just don't recall renting out the A7 III as much earlier in the year as I did later in the year when I was renting out the RS2 so many times. So again, these numbers aren't like, wow, you're renting it out like every day of the year. Obviously not. It's like 11 rentals, and most of the time people would rent it out 2 or 3 days. So it wouldn't be gone for very long, mostly over the weekend and stuff like that. So that would shift my focus on how I'm using my equipment, because we capture a lot of weddings. So I would be like, okay, I guess I'm not going to use Sony this weekend. I'm going to use Canon instead. And so I have a multitude of Canon cameras that I can fall back on, and they deliver just as the great quality as the Sonys would. So, or I would film with the Blackmagics and have a different kind of workflow for that weekend, depending on what was rented out. So that was really cool and a great workflow. This next year, as you can see, some of this equipment, I just threw it on the table, and I was like, this is like some of the best equipment, and not even, because I didn't even check this to see what was rented out the most. Top 5 was Sony A7 III, the rig setup, the RS2 Pro, the RS was behind that one, and then a Manfrotto tripod, followed by just the A7 III camera itself alone. So this year, I want to try new stuff where it's like playing with prices. Not to beat anyone to the bottom, just to see what price people are renting out majority of the time, and then just up it a little bit as rentals are happening with that equipment. So just different strategies to go about it. I definitely want to possibly double that number and go from nearly $4,000 to nearly $8,000. I think that would be really cool, and I can invest more into the equipment. I am probably going to start selling some of the equipment itself, just because it is the older version, and then invest that into the newer versions of cameras and stuff like that. So yeah, so I want to make it a continuation of series. I want to make different videos with different equipment and showing the utilization, and then through the studio I will promote that equipment of Sharegrid and then talk about it here on YouTube. So I think it'll be a really cool series to kind of like follow up on, and just a different way to make an extra income as a creative, as an artist. I do live in a big city. I live in Atlanta, and the creative scene is pretty big, so a lot of people are renting. I'm not trying to compete with any rental houses. I'm just sort of just making an extra little income for myself, not to supplement, to fall back on, just to make some extra cash. And I love equipment. This is just a lot of fun. So cheers, and thanks for following along.